You are the disgrace of this family. Don't you dare embarrass your brother. Just get out." Those words hit harder than any fist. Nina Sullivan stood frozen in the middle of her brother's grand opening celebration, surrounded by champagne flutes and congratulatory bouquets, wearing her worn-out kitchen sneakers, still smudged with grease from the morning shift. 200 guests stared. Her mother's finger was still pointed at the door. Her father wouldn't even look at her. And Brandon, her older brother, the newly minted Dr. Brandon Sullivan, simply adjusted his silk tie and turned away, as if she were nothing more than a stain on his pristine white coat. That night, Nina packed everything she owned into 2 garbage bags and left the only home she'd ever known. 15 years she had given to that family. 15 years of waking before dawn to prep collard greens and cornbread, of scrubbing cast-iron skillets until her knuckles cracked and bled, of handing over every single paycheck so her parents could funnel it into Brandon's medical school tuition and his dream of opening a private practice in Belle Meade. But what Nina's family didn't know, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that this was not the end of her story, not even close. This is the story of a woman who gave 15 years of her life to a family that never once said thank you, a family that used her, lied to her, and threw her away like she was nothing. But every family has its secrets, and some secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible time for the people who buried them. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and Nina Sullivan's body ached before her feet even hit the cold floor. Her hands, cracked at the knuckles, spotted with old burns, reached for the same apron she'd been tying on since she was 13 years old. Downstairs, the kitchen of Nana Maggie's kitchen was waiting. 500 pounds of chicken to season, collard greens to wash 3 times, cornbread batter to mix from scratch, all before the sun came up, and all before a single customer walked through the door. Somewhere in the house above, her older brother Brandon was still asleep. He didn't have to wake up until 8. He had a study group at Vanderbilt at 10, and then a tutoring session his parents paid $120 an hour for. His breakfast would be waiting on the table when he came down, made by Nina, of course, and he would eat it without a word, scroll through his phone, and leave without once looking in the direction of the kitchen. This was the deal. This had always been the deal. Brandon was the future, and Nina was the fuel. Your brother is going to be a doctor someday. That's what matters. You're good with your hands. Just keep this kitchen running and stop complaining. That was her mother, Karen, laying down the law when Nina was 15 and had dared to ask if she could join the debate team at school. Nina had gotten the highest score in her English class on a persuasive essay about food deserts in rural communities, and her teacher, Mrs. Robinson, had pulled her aside and told her she had a gift, that she should consider debate, maybe even a scholarship down the line. Nina had gone home that night buzzing with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Karen crushed it in under 10 seconds. Debate team? Who's going to cover your shift? You think these customers are going to wait while you play school? Your brother needs that tuition money. End of discussion. Nina never brought it up again. She learned, the way children in homes like hers learn, that wanting things for yourself was selfish, that dreams were a luxury reserved for people who mattered, and in the Sullivan household, only one person mattered. Every semester, Brandon got new Jordans, private SAT prep, and spending money wired to his college account, while Nina got a hairnet and a mop. The division was as clear as it was cruel. Brandon was the investment, and Nina was the labor. By 18, she had dropped out of high school to work full-time, not because she wanted to, but because her father, Richard, told her the restaurant would go under without her, and if the restaurant went under, Brandon couldn't finish pre-med at Vanderbilt. You want your brother to fail? Is that what you want? After everything we've sacrificed? The irony of Richard Sullivan using the word sacrificed would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. Richard was a man who believed appearances were everything, and hard work was for other people, and his talents were limited to 2 things: talking big and gambling bigger. Within 3 years of inheriting the restaurant from his mother, the legendary Margaret Sullivan, Nana Maggie herself, who had built it from a single folding table at a church parking lot, He had racked up $80,000 in debt at underground poker rooms across the city. He refinanced the building, maxed out every credit card he could get his hands on, and when the bank came calling, he did what he always did, put the burden on his daughter. Nina was the sacrifice. Every dollar the restaurant earned went into two buckets, Richard's gambling debts and Brandon's future, and Nina never saw a penny of it. She didn't have a bank account, didn't have health insurance, didn't even have a driver's license, because no one had ever bothered to teach her to drive. And through it all, through the recession when Nina's cooking kept the doors open, through the Vanderbilt graduation party she catered solo for 200 people without a single day off, through 3 straight months of double shifts so her parents could wire Brandon his medical school housing deposit in Philadelphia, her brother never once said thank you. He never even learned her schedule, never asked how she was doing, never once acknowledged that the life he was living had been built on the back of hers. One Thanksgiving, Nina had worked a 16-hour shift to prepare the restaurant's holiday catering orders. She came home exhausted, fingers pruned from washing dishes, and found the family sitting around the table without her. They had already said grace, already started eating, and her chair didn't even have a plate. Brandon looked up, fork in hand, and said the only thing he ever said to her. "Oh, can you grab me some more sweet tea while you're up?" Nina poured the tea, but didn't sit down. She went back to the kitchen, ate a plate of leftovers standing over the sink, and cried so quietly that no one heard. Not that anyone was listening. To Brandon, Nina was furniture, useful, silent, and beneath notice. To her parents, she was an engine, something you pour fuel into and expect to run forever without maintenance. Nobody in that family ever once asked Nina what she wanted, what she dreamed of, or whether she was okay. She was 28 years old, and she had never been on a vacation, never been on a date, never owned a single thing that was truly hers. She was a ghost in her own family, a shadow behind the stove, and nobody, not her parents, not her brother, not a single soul, had any idea how drastically that was about to change. The grand opening of Brandon Sullivan's private orthopedic practice in Belle Meade was, by all accounts, a spectacle. He had leased a sleek glass and steel building on Broadway, hired an interior designer who charged $400 an hour, and thrown an opening night party that could have doubled as a society gala, complete with ice sculptures, a live jazz quartet, and a raw bar flown in from the coast. The guest list included local politicians, Vanderbilt alumni, and at least 3 attending physicians from Vanderbilt Medical who Brandon was desperate to impress. Nina found out about the party 2 days before it happened, not from an invitation, but because her mother handed her a catering order. 200 pieces of your fried chicken, the mini peach cobblers, and the shrimp and grits bites. Have it ready by 5 on Saturday. And for God's sake, Nina, don't show up looking like you just crawled out of that kitchen. Nina spent 48 hours straight cooking, hand-breading every piece of chicken, baking 300 mini cobblers, deveining 12 pounds of shrimp. And when Saturday came, she loaded everything into the back of her father's pickup truck and drove, illegally since she still didn't have a license, to Brandon's gleaming new practice. She arrived at the service entrance, as instructed, and set up the food in the back, as instructed. And then she made the mistake of stepping into the main reception area to see her brother's name etched into the glass above the front desk. That's when Karen spotted her. The room was full. 200 people in cocktail attire, holding champagne, admiring the modern art on the walls and the diplomas in their polished frames. And there was Nina, in her worn jeans and kitchen sneakers, standing at the edge of the crowd like a ghost who had wandered in from another world. "What are you doing out here? Get back to the kitchen where you belong!" Her mother had grabbed her arm and was hissing into her ear, but the damage was done. Brandon had already seen her, and he walked over with that look on his face, the one that said she had committed an unforgivable offense simply by existing in his space. "Why is she out here? Mom, I told you she cannot be seen at this event. Do you know who's here tonight? Dr. Patterson from Vanderbilt Medical, Judge Williams, people who matter, and she's standing here looking like the help." Nina felt something crack inside her chest, not break, but crack, like a fault line that had been shifting for 15 years, finally giving way. "Brandon, I cooked all the food for your party. Every single bite these people are eating came from my hands. I just wanted to see—" "See what? Nobody invited you to see anything. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing this whole family." And then Richard stepped in, her father, the man who had gambled away the family's legacy and made his daughter pay for it. He looked at Nina with cold, empty eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Don't you dare stand in the way of your brother's future. You are the disgrace of this family. Don't embarrass your brother. Just get out. Now." The room went quiet. Not completely. The jazz still played and glasses still clinked, but the people nearest to them had heard. Nina could feel their eyes on her, some pitying, some curious, none intervening. She walked out the front door, not the service entrance, the front door. Past the valet stand, past the luxury cars, past the carved sign that read, "Dr. Brandon Sullivan, M.D., Orthopedic Surgery." She walked all the way to the bus stop on Broadway, sat down on the bench, and stared at the night sky until the number 55 came. When she got home, she packed her things into 2 garbage bags. It took 11 minutes. That's how little she had to show for 28 years of life. She left her key on the kitchen counter, the same kitchen where she had spent half her life, and walked out into the Nashville night without looking back. No one called, no one texted, and no one even noticed she was gone until the next morning when there was nobody there to open the restaurant. Nina slept on a bench in Centennial Park the first night and found a women's shelter off Church Street with an open bed the second. On the third day, she walked into every restaurant within a 2-mile radius and asked if they were hiring. A barbecue joint called Smoky Roads on Nolensville Pike gave her a shot. The owner, a 62-year-old pitmaster named Earl Rhodes, took one look at the calluses on Nina's hands and hired her on the spot as a prep cook at $12 an hour. "Those are working hands. That's all I need to see. Be here tomorrow at 6. Nina showed up at 5:30 and cleaned the whole kitchen before Earl even arrived. By the end of her first week, she had reorganized the walk-in cooler, fixed a leak in the dishwasher with a YouTube tutorial and a wrench, and suggested a new dry rub recipe that Earl grudgingly admitted was better than his own. Within 3 months, Nina had completely transformed Smoky Roads. She introduced a rotating daily special, smothered pork chops on Mondays, beef pot roast on Tuesdays, catfish and waffles on weekends, that had people lining up before the doors opened. She redesigned the menu layout, started an Instagram page that gained 8,000 followers in 6 weeks, and personally trained 3 new kitchen hires who worshipped the ground she walked on. Earl Rhodes had been in the restaurant business for 35 years, and he had never seen anything like Nina Sullivan. "Girl, I don't know where you came from, but I thank God every morning you walked through that door. This place hasn't seen numbers like this since 1992. By the 6-month mark, Smoky Roads had been featured in Nashville Magazine's Best Hidden Gems list and had earned a 4.8 rating on Yelp with over 500 reviews. Earl, whose knees were giving out and whose wife had been begging him to retire for years, sat Nina down one evening after the last customer left. "I want to make you a partner, 50-50. You run the kitchen, I'll handle the front. And when I'm ready to hang it up, this place is yours. First right of refusal. I already talked to my lawyer." Nina sat at that table and cried for 20 minutes straight, because it was the first time in her entire life that someone had looked at her work and said, "You deserve to own this." Meanwhile, across town, Nana Maggie's kitchen was falling apart. It took exactly 11 days for Richard Sullivan to realize what he had lost. The first morning without Nina, he burned 2 trays of biscuits, oversalted the collard greens so badly that 3 customers sent them back, and forgot to place the weekly meat order entirely. By Wednesday, the health inspector showed up for a surprise visit and found grease buildup on the exhaust hood that Nina had always cleaned every single night. They passed, barely, but the writing was on the wall. Karen tried to step in, but she had spent the last 15 years supervising, not cooking. She could tell you what was wrong with a plate, but she couldn't make one to save her life. Richard hired a cook from Craigslist, who lasted 4 days before walking out after a screaming match about seasoning, and the next one he hired stole 3 cases of chicken wings and disappeared. Within 2 months, Nana Maggie's kitchen had lost 40% of its regular customers, and the Yelp reviews turned vicious. "What happened to this place?" one read. "Used to be the best Southern comfort food in Nashville. Now it tastes like a hospital cafeteria." Another simply said, "Nana Maggie is rolling in her grave." But the financial bleeding went far deeper than lost customers. Brandon's new practice had opened with $750,000 in loans for the build-out, the medical equipment, and the staffing. And Richard had personally co-signed 3 of those loans, pledging the restaurant's revenue as collateral. With the restaurant hemorrhaging money, the monthly loan payments became impossible. Brandon called home for the first time in weeks, not to ask how his parents were doing, and not to check on the restaurant. He called because his accountant had flagged 3 missed payments, and the bank was threatening to adjust the terms. "What do you mean the payments are late? I don't care about the restaurant, Dad. Figure it out. Sell something. Do whatever you have to do. I am not losing this practice because you can't run a kitchen without my little sister." That sentence, "my little sister," was the closest Brandon had come to acknowledging Nina's existence since the night he threw her out. And even now, he said it the way you'd talk about a piece of equipment, a dishwasher, a meat slicer, something functional and forgettable. That night, Richard and Karen sat at their kitchen table and stared at a stack of bills they couldn't pay. The restaurant's monthly revenue had dropped from $22,000 to just under $9,000, and Brandon's loan payments alone were $6,000 a month. Add in utilities, suppliers, their own mortgage, and Richard's lingering gambling debts, which he still hadn't told Karen about, and the math was catastrophic. They needed Nina back, and they were willing to do anything to make it happen, even the most unforgivable thing a parent can do. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while Nina was in the middle of perfecting a new brown sugar bourbon glaze for Smoky Road's weekend special. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, and she almost didn't answer, but something, maybe instinct, maybe that stubborn thread of loyalty that 15 years of abuse hadn't quite managed to sever, made her pick up. It was a man's voice, calm, professional, measured. "Is this Nina Sullivan? My name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm an attorney representing your father, Richard Sullivan. I'm calling to inform you that your father has been hospitalized at Vanderbilt University Medical Center with a serious cardiac condition. His doctors have indicated the situation is critical. Your mother has authorized me to reach out and ask if you would be willing to come to the hospital." Nina's hands went cold. Whatever anger she carried, whatever wounds still bled from that night at Brandon's practice, her father was dying, or so she believed. She told Earl she had a family emergency, drove to Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Earl's borrowed truck, and ran through the corridors until she found room 412. Richard was in the bed, hooked up to monitors, his face gray and drawn, while Karen sat in the chair beside him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The scene was devastating, heartbreaking, and entirely manufactured. Richard Sullivan was not sick. He had paid a former gambling buddy who worked as a hospital orderly to get him admitted for observation. The monitors were real, but displaying the vitals of a perfectly healthy man, and the attorney was real too. Gerald Hutchins was indeed Richard's lawyer, but his involvement had nothing to do with a medical emergency. It was about getting Nina back into that kitchen. Nina didn't know any of this yet. She stood in the doorway of room 412, and despite everything, her eyes filled with tears. "Daddy?" Karen looked up, and for a brief moment, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the calculating expression Nina had seen her whole life. "He's been like this for 3 days. The doctors say his heart is giving out. Stress, the restaurant, your brother's loans. It's all been too much for him. We didn't want to call you, but Nina, he might not make it through the month." Nina stayed at the hospital for 2 days, sleeping in the waiting room chair, eating from the vending machine, holding her father's hand while he performed the role of a dying man with the commitment of a seasoned actor. On the 3rd day, Karen made her move. "The restaurant is in trouble, baby. Bad trouble. Without you, I hate to say it, but without you in that kitchen, we can't make the payments on Brandon's practice. If the practice goes under, your brother loses everything. His medical license could be affected, And your father. The stress is what put him here in the first place. If you could just come back, even for a little while, just until we get back on our feet." Nina agreed, not for her parents and not for Brandon, but for the ghost of the father she remembered from childhood. The one who used to let her lick the cake batter spoon, the one who carried her on his shoulders through Centennial Park. That man was gone, but his shadow still had power over her. She moved back in and went back to the kitchen, and within 2 weeks, Nana Maggie's kitchen was packed again. The regulars returned, the Yelp reviews flipped, and the money started flowing. But something was different this time. Nina was different. She watched, she listened, and she paid attention to things she had never questioned before. 3 weeks after her return, she walked into her parents' bedroom to bring her father his morning tea and found something that changed everything. Richard's hospital discharge papers, sitting in an open drawer. Not the ones from Vanderbilt Medical, the real ones from a private clinic across town, dated 1 day before his so-called hospitalization, with a single note from the attending physician. Patient presents with no cardiac abnormalities, all vitals within normal range, no treatment necessary. Her father wasn't dying. He had never been dying. The whole thing, the hospital room, the monitors, the attorney's phone call, her mother's tears, every last bit of it had been a performance, a con job designed to drag her back to the kitchen so she could keep funding her brother's empire. Nina put the papers back exactly where she found them, went downstairs, tied on her apron, and started the morning prep as if nothing had happened. But behind her calm exterior, something had shifted permanently. The last thread of loyalty, the last whisper of, "But they're still my parents," it was gone, burned to ash. And in its place was a plan. To understand what happened next, you have to go back 10 years, back to when Nana Maggie was still alive, still sharp as a tack at 78, and watching her son Richard destroy everything she had built. Margaret Sullivan had built Nana Maggie's kitchen on a plot of land she purchased in 1979 for $11,000, a half-acre lot on Main Street that everybody told her was worthless. But she saw what they couldn't, a community that was growing, a neighborhood that would one day be worth a fortune. She bought the land outright, paid off the note in 7 years, and built her restaurant brick by brick. When Richard took over after her stroke, Margaret couldn't speak anymore, but she could still see. She watched from her wheelchair as Richard gambled away the cash reserves, watched him take out a second mortgage she never would have approved, and watched him treat Nina, the granddaughter who visited her every single day, who braided her hair and read to her from the Book of Psalms, like a servant. What Richard didn't know was that his mother's mind was still razor sharp, and she had an attorney of her own. Margaret's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Brennan, had been handling the Sullivan family's real estate for decades, and when Richard's gambling debts finally caught up with him and the land beneath Nana Maggie's kitchen went to a tax auction, Patricia was ready. Using funds from a trust that Margaret had secretly established years earlier, money that Richard never knew existed, Patricia bid on the property at auction and won. The land was purchased in Nina's name. Nina, who was 18 at the time and had no idea any of this was happening. The deed was filed, the trust documents were sealed, and Patricia locked everything in a safe deposit box at a bank on Broadway with instructions that it was not to be opened until Nina turned 25, or until the right moment came. Margaret passed away 2 months later, knowing that her granddaughter owned the ground beneath the restaurant, and that her son had technically been occupying his own daughter's property for years without a clue. Of course, he hadn't actually been paying rent. That was the whole point. Patricia had allowed Richard to continue operating the restaurant on the property without a lease, without payments, without any acknowledgement of Nina's ownership. She was simply waiting for the moment when the truth would matter most. That moment was about to arrive. 3 days after Nina discovered her father's fake hospital papers, she received a phone call from Patricia Brennan. "Nina, we need to talk. There are some things about your grandmother's estate that you need to know. Things that are going to change your life." They met at a coffee shop in Midtown, where Patricia laid out everything. The trust, the auction, the deed, the 10 years of undocumented occupancy. Nina listened with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that went cold before she took a single sip. Your grandmother saw what your father was. She loved him. He was her son, but she didn't trust him. And she saw how they treated you. She told me, right before her last stroke, she said, "That girl is the only real Sullivan left. Make sure she gets what's hers." Nina stared at the deed with her name on it. Nina Louise Sullivan, typed in official Davidson County ink on a document filed 10 years ago by a grandmother who couldn't speak but had found a way to protect her anyway. And as it happened, the timing couldn't have been more perfect, because just 2 weeks earlier, the city of Nashville had announced a major redevelopment project along Main Street. The entire block where Nana Maggie's kitchen sat was slated for a mixed-use development, and property owners were being offered buyout packages. The estimated compensation for the Sullivan property, Nina's property, was $2 million. Richard Sullivan found out about the redevelopment project the same way everyone on Main Street did. A glossy flyer in the mailbox from the development company, Atlantic Meridian Partners, announcing a community meeting and offering generous fair market compensation to affected property owners. He nearly danced. Karen cried tears of joy, and Brandon, for the first time in months, called home with something other than complaints. $2 million? Are you serious? Dad, that solves everything. Pay off my loans, clear your debts, and you and Mom can finally retire. This is it. This is our ticket. They celebrated that night with a bottle of Jack Daniels that Richard had been saving, and they didn't invite Nina. She was in the kitchen, as always, cleaning up after the dinner rush. She could hear them laughing through the walls, and she smiled, not with bitterness, but with patience. The patience of someone who knows exactly what's coming. The meeting with Atlantic Meridian Partners was scheduled for the following Friday at 10 in the morning. Richard put on his best suit, the charcoal one he saved for funerals and court dates, while Karen wore her church hat, and Brandon drove down from Belle Meade in his black BMW, looking every inch the successful doctor. They sat at the restaurant's biggest table, like a royal family waiting to receive tribute. The development company sent 2 representatives, a project manager named David Chen and a real estate attorney named Sandra Williams. They carried matching leather portfolios and wore the polite, neutral expressions of people who delivered life-changing news for a living. Richard leaned forward, hands clasped, grinning. "So, $2 million, where do we sign?" David Chen opened his portfolio, adjusted his glasses, and looked not at Richard but at Nina, who was standing quietly near the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Actually, Mr. Sullivan, before we proceed, I need to clarify something regarding the property ownership. Our title search has confirmed that the legal owner of this parcel, Davidson County Deed Reference Number FC-2016-44891, is not Richard Sullivan. The property is held in the name of Nina Louise Sullivan." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ice machine humming in the back kitchen. Richard's grin didn't fade immediately. It froze, like a mask that hadn't gotten the message yet. "I'm sorry, what? That's impossible. This is my mother's property. She left it to me. I've been running this restaurant for 12 years. Sir, the deed was transferred at a tax auction 10 years ago. The previous owner, which county records show was you, lost the property due to unpaid tax liens. It was purchased at auction by a trust acting on behalf of Ms. Nina Sullivan. The deed has been properly filed and recorded with Davidson County since that date." Karen stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor like a scream. "Nina? Nina owns this building? That doesn't... Richard, what is he talking about? What tax auction?" And there it was, the other secret Richard had been keeping. Not just the gambling, not just the debts, but the fact that he had lost his own mother's land, the land she had worked her entire life to own, because he couldn't pay the property taxes after blowing the money at underground card games. Brandon was on his feet, his face a mask of fury. "This is fraud. This has to be fraud. She's 28 years old. She was a teenager when this supposedly happened. There's no way she could have..." Sandra Williams, the attorney, spoke for the first time. "The purchase was made through a legally established trust created by Margaret Sullivan, your grandmother, and executed by her attorney, Patricia Brennan, Esquire. All documents have been verified. Ms. Nina Sullivan is the sole legal owner of this property. There is no ambiguity. Nina set down her dish towel, walked to the table, and sat down across from her family. For the first time in her life, she was the one looking down at them. But the attorney wasn't finished. There's one additional matter. For the past 10 years, the Sullivan family has been operating a commercial business on Ms. Nina Sullivan's property without a lease agreement and without paying any rent. Our firm has calculated the fair market rental value for this property over that period, including accrued interest, at approximately $680,000. David Chen slid a printed statement across the table. What this means, Mr. Sullivan, is that before any redevelopment compensation is distributed, this outstanding debt must be resolved. The $2 million buyout belongs to Nina as the property owner, and the $680,000 in back rent is a separate obligation owed to her by the occupants, which is your family. In plain terms, not only do you not receive the compensation, you owe Nina a significant sum on top of it. Richard's face had gone from frozen to gray. Karen collapsed back into her chair with her church hat askew, and Brandon stood with his mouth open, his BMW key fob clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Nobody spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then Brandon turned on his father. "You lost the land? You lost Grandma's land gambling and you never told us? And now this whole thing, Dad, my practice, my loans, you co-signed with this property as collateral. If this property isn't yours, those loans are in default. Do you understand what you've done?" Richard couldn't answer. For the first time in his life, the man who always had a scheme, always had an angle, always had someone else to blame, had nothing. They came to her that night, all three of them, Richard, Karen, and Brandon, standing at the door of the restaurant kitchen like strangers begging to be let in from the cold. Richard's eyes were red, Karen was trembling, and even Brandon, proud, untouchable Brandon, had loosened his tie and let his armor crack. Richard went down first, literally. His knees hit the kitchen floor, the same floor Nina had scrubbed 10,000 times, and he clasped his hands together like a man in prayer. "Baby girl, please. I know we did wrong. I know I did wrong, but you can't take everything. This restaurant is all we have. Your mother and I will be on the street. Please, Nina, I'm your father." Karen was next, her voice cracking with the kind of desperation that comes when someone realizes their entire world is built on a foundation they stole from someone else. "Nina, sweetheart, we can work this out. We're family. Whatever you need, an apology, money, a share of the business, just name it. But please don't do this. Don't throw your own parents out on the street." And then Brandon, Dr. Brandon Sullivan, who had never lowered himself to ask his sister for anything, who had watched her be humiliated at his own grand opening and felt nothing, who had called her an embarrassment in front of 200 people, stepped forward with his jaw clenched and his eyes wet. "Nina, my practice, the loans, if those loans default, I lose everything. The building, the equipment, my staff. I could face malpractice issues if my patients' records are disrupted. My medical license could be reviewed. I'm asking you, please, don't let this destroy what I've built." Nina listened to every word and let them finish. She let the silence sit for a long, long moment, long enough for each of them to feel the weight of what they had done pressing down on their shoulders, the way it had pressed down on hers for 15 years. Then she spoke. "You called me the family's disgrace. You said I was embarrassing your brother and told me to get out. Remember that? Because I remember every single word." She looked at her father. "You faked a heart attack to get me back. You had an attorney call me and tell me you were dying, and I drove across the city in a borrowed truck, shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel, because I thought I was going to lose my father. And it was a lie to get me back in this kitchen so I could keep paying for everyone else's life." She looked at her mother. "You stood there at Brandon's party and told me to go back to the kitchen where I belonged. You never once, not once in 28 years, asked me what I wanted, what my dreams were, whether I was happy. I was your daughter, and you treated me like a piece of equipment." She looked at Brandon. "And you. What I've built. That's what you just said, what you built. With whose money, Brandon? Whose sweat paid for Vanderbilt? Whose hands cooked the food that kept the lights on while you were studying? whose life was put on hold, permanently, so that you could become Dr. Sullivan. You didn't build anything. I built it, all of it, and you never even noticed I was in the room." She stood up and smoothed her apron, the same Nana Maggie's kitchen apron she'd been wearing since she was 13, then folded it neatly and placed it on the counter for the last time. "You said don't embarrass your brother, don't drag his name down, don't be a disgrace. Well, don't worry, there won't be a name to drag down anymore. Grandma Margaret, Nana Maggie, she knew exactly who Daddy was. She knew he'd gamble this land away, and she knew that I was the only one who would protect what she built. So she gave it to me, the real owner, the one who actually earned it." She picked up the folder that Patricia Brennan had prepared. Eviction notices, the back rent calculation, the deed, the trust documents, and set it on the table in front of her family. "You have 14 days to vacate the property. The $680,000 in back rent is due within 90 days. If it's not paid, my attorney will pursue all available legal remedies, including liens against any assets held by co-signers of outstanding loans. You know what that means, Brandon. Your practice, your equipment, your building, everything." Brandon lunged forward. "You can't do this. I'll fight this in court. That trust? Grandma wasn't in her right mind. She couldn't even speak. There's no way this holds up." Every document was notarized, witnessed, and filed with Davidson County. Your grandmother's cognitive capacity was assessed and certified by her physician before the trust was executed. And Patricia Brennan will be happy to provide you with those records in discovery. But Brandon, and I mean this as genuinely as I can, I'd recommend you spend your legal budget on a good bankruptcy attorney instead. She walked toward the door, and at the threshold, she turned back one last time. Nana Maggie used to say something. She'd say, "The stove don't lie, it knows who really cooks." I used to think she was talking about food. Now I know she was talking about this family. She knew who the real Sullivan was. And now you do too. Nina walked out of Nana Maggie's kitchen for the last time. The night air hit her face, warm Nashville air, thick with magnolia and possibility, and she breathed it in like a woman who had just been released from a prison she didn't even know she was in. Behind her, the restaurant was dark. In 14 days, it would be empty. In 90 days, the demolition crews would arrive. And in 6 months, Nina Louise Sullivan, the former family disgrace, the girl who had never been allowed to join the debate team or learn to drive, would close on a $2 million property buyout, become the full owner of Smoky Roads Barbecue, and open a culinary arts scholarship at University of Tennessee in her grandmother's name, the Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Young Women Who Cook. Brandon's practice closed within 4 months. The bank seized the equipment first, then the lease. He ended up taking a salaried position at a rural hospital in East Tennessee. Good, honest work, but a far cry from the Belle Meade empire he'd imagined. Richard and Karen moved to a one-bedroom apartment in Cookeville, supported by Richard's disability checks and Karen's part-time job at a church daycare. They never apologized, not really, but they never forgot either. And Nina? Nina thrived. She stood behind the counter at Smoky Roads every morning at 5:30, prepping the day's menu with the same hands that had once scrubbed her family's floors for nothing. But now those hands belonged to her. Every callus, every scar, every burn mark. They were hers, and they were worth every penny. Nana Maggie knew something that took the rest of the world 28 years to figure out. The person they called a disgrace was the only one holding that family together. And when she finally let go, they had nothing left to stand on. There are families that lift you up, and there are families that use you as the foundation and never once look down to see the cracks forming beneath their feet. Nina was that foundation, and when she finally stepped out from under them, the whole house came down. What do you think? Did Nina do the right thing? Would you have given them a second chance? Or would you have walked away the same way she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story from the front porch. We'll see you next time.